Okay, so in this lesson, we're talking about clauses and phrases. So we have to know the difference between those two. And I'm going to quickly just do a definition that applies to both. So both phrases and clauses, and this is true for both things, is they both are a group of words, okay? So if someone asks you for a basic rundown on what's a phrase and what's a clause, you can say, hey, it's a group of words. Now, there is a quick distinction between these two types of groups of words. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. So a phrase is a group of words that can contain a subject and a verb, but does not have both. Okay, so phrase has a subject or a verb, but it doesn't have both at the same time. Okay, so for example, by my favorite author, here we have no verb in that example. There is a subject, a noun, rather, but no verb. From my friend, it's another one without a verb. About my friend, a famous baseball player, and are painted. This last one here is the one that contains the verb and instead of the noun. Okay, so those are all examples of phrases. They're groups of words, but they don't have both a verb and a noun in them. Okay, now I've taken these phrases and I've put them in sentences. So the book was written by my favorite author. This letter from my friend is my most cherished possession. They gossiped about my friend, Cal Ripken Jr., a famous baseball player, was nicknamed the Iron Man, and the doors are painted black. So those are all phrases, the underlined portions of those sentences, because they're groups of words that kind of stick together. That's the big thing. Like phrases, you can kind of tell that those words act as a unit, they act as a group. But again, they do not have both a subject and a verb, or a noun and a verb. Okay. Clauses, on the other hand, you may already be guessing that what the difference between a clause and a phrase is. A clause is also a group of words, like I said, but they do contain both a subject and a verb. That's the difference between a phrase and a clause. Still another unit of words together, just like a phrase is, but they have both a subject and a verb. Okay, and now there are two types of clauses that we want to talk about. So an independent clause, right here, okay, is a clause that expresses a complete thought. So what that means is it can act as a sentence. A sentence is a complete thought, right? And a sentence has both a subject and a verb, okay? Just like an independent clause. So I went to the movies. Even just this part right here, I went to the movies, acts as our clause. Our after work, that would actually act as a phrase, right? Because after work is a group, a small unit of words, only two there, but they act as a unit. Second one, everyone ran to the car. Polly is reading. They smell great. Okay. Now, just to show you guys how we have both a subject and a verb in here. So I went to the movies after work. I is our subject, and I'll underline our verb, went. Okay, so in that clause, we have I went, all right? And in fact, you could erase the rest of this and you could have an independent clause. I went acts alone, okay? Typically, we want to know where we went to. So to the movies is a phrase, okay, telling us where we went to, kind of an adverb. And then after work is another phrase telling you when. Okay, so this clause, independent clause, starts with a clause and then it has two phrases. The next one also has a clause and at least one phrase. So everyone is the subject here, okay? And the verb is ran. Okay, so everyone ran. That's our clause. And then in there, we have also attached to it a phrase. To the car is a phrase. Polly is reading. Okay, so we've got Polly is our subject and is reading is our verb. And they smell great They is their subject doing the action, and smell here is the verb. So these clauses have a subject and a verb in each. So here I've kind of put them in longer sentences. So I went to the movies after work because I was bored. Here we have two clauses. Everyone ran to the car while Polly unlocked the doors. Polly is reading until she has to go to bed. And although the pies look weird, they smell great. So the underlined portions of each of these sentences are actually our independent clauses because you can take them out and they could be complete sentences on their own. Notice that these can act as sentences alone, or you can add them into sentences with other clauses and they would still make sense. I also want to talk about the dependent clause. Okay, so a dependent clause is still a group of words that contains a subject and a verb. However, this does not express a complete thought. Sometimes people call them a subordinate clause. You may have grown up or you may have heard of subordinate clause. That also means dependent clause. I like to use dependent clause because it contrasts nicely with independent clause. So the opposite of independent is dependent. It's easier to remember. So here, because I was bored, we have the I, whoops, I'm sorry, let me use red for that one. Okay, I is our subject. And then was is our verb. So that has a subject and a verb. It's a group of words, but it can't be a complete sentence. If you were to just say, because I was bored, maybe in speaking that might make sense in context to some other question, but alone, if you were to put a period at the end of that, it wouldn't be a proper complete sentence. Because I was bored, what, right? The next one is the same way. So Polly unlocked the doors. Unlocked is our verb, and Polly is our noun there in that clause. Here our subject, and I say noun, it could be a noun or a pronoun. So for example, she is not a noun, but it's a pronoun, and it's acting as our subject here. And then to go, she has to go to bed. I'll just underline to go as our verb. Okay. And then although the pies looked weird, here we've got pies as our subject and looked is our linking verb there. Okay, so each of these have a subject and a verb, but notice that none of these can act as a complete thought. That is, they couldn't be their own sentence. Although the pies looked weird, well, that makes us wonder what. Okay, notice that the reason why these can't be complete sentences is because of the word at the beginning. So because, while, until, and although. If you were to actually take those words off the dependent clauses, those dependent clauses would now become independent clauses. So if you were to say, instead of saying because I was bored, and you took off that because, you now have I was bored, which is a complete thought. That's a complete sentence. Same with while Polly unlocked the doors. If I were to just say Polly unlocked the doors, that would become a complete sentence. Okay. Until she has to go to bed. Again, this is a proper sentence if we were to just say she has to go to bed. Okay. Although the pies looked weird, if I took off that word at the beginning, now my dependent clause is an independent clause. The pies looked weird is a complete thought. So dependent clauses all have what's called the dependent marker word in front of them. So the dependent marker word is a word that goes in front of a clause, an independent clause, and it turns it into a dependent clause. Okay, so all of these here, as you see them now, are independent clauses. But if I were to erase everything, you see now that they are dependent clauses, and they're sentences. I'm sorry, they're clauses that could not be sentences. Okay, on their own. They depend on another clause to be complete thought. So I have the same sentences that I had above on the first page, but now I've underlined the dependent clauses. So I went to the movie after work because I was bored. Everyone ran to the car while Polly unlocked the doors. Polly is reading until she has to go to bed, and although the pies look weird, they smell great. So I've underlined in this case the dependent clauses that we have here. All right, so just to kind of color code, I'll underline dependent clauses in blue, even though they're already underlined. Okay. I'm going to underline in red the independent clauses. I went, everyone ran, and Polly is reading. Really, Polly is reading here. Okay, and now I'm going to underline in green our phrases. Okay, so to the movies, after work is another phrase. To the car is a phrase. Oops, I forgot to underline an independent clause. They smell great. Okay, so here we have a color code where our red is an independent clause. I'll just call it IC. Okay, green is our phrase. Okay, and blue is DC. Normally I would say DC stands for Diet Coke, but here it stands for dependent clause. Okay, and just the last thing that we want to do is I want to show you guys a group of dependent marker words. These are all words, and you'll have access to these. I wish I could have fit while. Let's try to get this all on one word here, on one page here. This is a list of typical dependent marker words. So if you take any one of these words and you put them in front of a clause, it turns that independent clause into a dependent clause. And so when you're looking to identify an independent, when you're looking to identify a clause as either independent or dependent, see if it has one of these words to start, okay? So if you have the sentence, I am fishing, that's an independent clause, okay? You can easily change that into a dependent clause by adding one of these marker words. So if I were to say until, this independent marker word now changes my independent clause into a dependent clause. And you can try it out with any one of these words. There are lots of dependent marker words, but they go at the beginning of a clause, a dependent clause, and they really are what takes an independent clause and turns them into dependent clauses. Okay, so that is the lesson.